Welcome to What's Going On, the weekly podcast and videocast of First United Methodist Church in Yankton, South Dakota. Hi, and welcome to this week's episode of What's Going On. I'm Pastor Katie here at First United Methodist in Yankton, South Dakota, and I'm glad you could join me for this episode. And Merry Christmas! I just want to get it out of the way that I am recording this episode early, so I'm not actually in the church on this Christmas day, and I really sort of hope you're not watching this on Christmas and instead spending it with someone you love. But if not, I hope that spending a little time with me can be a fun experience for you, I suppose. Just to give you, again, a little heads up on the things that are happening. Obviously, the church office is closed on Christmas. We do have worship service on December 29th. And December 30th, we have Pastor Book Club, and we're doing Christmas from the Backside. And so you are invited to come to that 7 o'clock Monday night on December 30th, just to gather to talk about Christmas and the things that we learned. January's book, I did announce it last week, is Help Thanks Wow by Anne Lamott. And so you can go ahead and order that and get going on that one if you'd like for the new year. Also, don't forget that we have a Tuesday lunch study. Will be coming back on January 14th, not the 7th, because I'm not here on the 7th. And we are doing Difficult Words of Jesus by Amy Jill Levine. That is a video-only series, no homework required. But if you are looking for something more in-depth, Disciple Bible Study is coming back, and let me check my date on that. That's going to start on the 12th of January. We're going to be doing the New Testament. Even if you didn't do the Old Testament with us, you can hop in for the New Testament. That's Sunday starting at 8 a.m. I do provide coffee. In the fall, we've kind of been taking turns bringing in breakfast, really simple things. Also, there's childcare provided. And so if that was one of the reasons you didn't want to commit to that, know that that is available as well. And the workbooks for that one are $20, and that does have homework to it, but it is also for anyone looking for something to go a little bit deeper, that is a great option. This January 5th will be our Epiphany worship service. That's where we'll be doing the star words, which is a tradition that we've been doing the last few years, and certainly going to keep that up. And so you're going to want to make sure you're there for that. There is no 605 for both December 25th and January 1st, obviously. So they'll come back on the 8th. I'm looking at my calendar if you're wondering where I'm looking. So a little bit of time off. Hopefully, it's a good time of rest and just with family and enjoying all of that. I have on today, I want to share it. The staff last year all got shirts, most likely 2 shirts that are Christmas themed. And mine is most likely to boss Santa around. I think it's because it has the word boss in it, and I'm the boss. And Santa should know that. So anyway, that is my little festive outfit for today for our Christmas themed podcast. Last week, as I said, I was going to share some more origin stories of some of our popular hymns around Christmas. And I'm going to start with one. Again, I'm going to use this book, Then Sings My Soul. Because this hymn, Hark the Herald Angels Sing, was written by Charles Wesley. If that name sounds familiar to you, or if you've never heard that name before in your life, Charles Wesley is the brother of John Wesley. John Wesley is the founder of the Methodist movement, and we kind of consider him to be the founder of the Methodist church and this sort of brand of Christianity, if you will. Charles was part of the Holy Club along with John at Oxford University. He was also a priest in the Church of England, but very prolific writer and poet, and wrote, I mean, gobs and gobs of poems, and many of them turned into hymns. And if you were to go through our hymnal, I wonder actually if I went through our hymnal, our United Methodist hymnal, which I just happen to have on my shelf because, why wouldn't I? In the back of our hymnal, there's all kinds of resources, but one of them is writers of the hymns. And so what I'm doing right now is I'm going to pull up the name Wesley. Wesley, Wesley, Wesley. I'm not going to be able to count these that fast to make this interesting for anybody, but I just want to point out, so like some of them will have, they wrote one hymn. This whole little paragraph right here, that's all the hymns that John or Charles Wesley wrote. And then there's poems and there's responses. Oh, John himself did four of our hymns, but Charles did, I do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. I'm going to say probably within our current hymnal, there's still about 40 hymns from Charles Wesley. And one of them is Hark the Herald Angels Sing. And so let me share with you a little bit about this hymn. Upon his conversion, Charles Wesley immediately began writing hymns, each one packed with doctrine. Fun fact, I can't just read things. Methodists are known as, we don't have what you would call a book of systematic theology. Now, the average person, this is like not a big deal, but in other denominations, they have, the person who sort of founded it or got the movement going would then sit down and write, like, this is all the stuff we believe about everything. I have a couple. I'm going to pull out. This is a small systematic because it's one. But here's one. This is Millard Erickson. I think I had to use this in one of my seminaries. So they would write, and you can look up, okay, well, what do we believe about God? It would have a whole section. This is what we believe about God. This is what we believe about Jesus. This is what we believe about sin, on and on and on. The Reformed Church, John Calvin, who was the founder of that movement, his is called the Christian Institutes of Religion. And it is not one book, but it is a shelf of books that he wrote. And it's very systematic. It's very logical. I have problems with it, but that's why I'm not Reformed. Uh, Methodists do not have that. Instead, what we have is our hymnal. That Methodists are sort of known that our theology is found in our music. And I think that has a lot to do with Charles Wesley. So let me see if I can finish the first sentence. I'm cracking myself up over here. All right. Charles Wesley immediately began writing hymns, each one packed with doctrine, all of them exhibiting strength and sensitivity, both beauty and theological brawn. He wrote constantly, and even on horseback, his mind was flooded with new songs. He often stopped at houses along the road and ran in, asking for pen and ink. He wrote, just pause for a moment. Do you want to guess how many he wrote? So I've already told you that in our current hymnal, we have about 40 some. Just throw out a number. I want to, you can even comment. Comment if you're watching this on YouTube, comment in the below before I tell you what the actual number is. I want to know what your guess is. He wrote over, are you ready for this? 6,000 hymns. 6,000. Did anyone get that? I certainly wouldn't have. And he didn't like people tinkering with the words. In one of his hymnals, he wrote, I beg leave to mention a thought which has been long upon my mind, and which I should long ago have inserted in the public papers, had I not been unwilling to stir up a nest of hornets. There's definitely been times that I've chosen not to do something as so I would not stir up a nest of hornets. Many gentlemen have done my brother and me, he's talking about John, though without naming us, the honor to reprint many of our hymns. Now, they are perfectly welcome to do so, provided they print them just as they are. But I desire they would not attempt to mend them, for they are not really able. None of them is able to mend either the sense or the verse. Therefore, I must beg of them these two favors. Either let them stand just as they are, or to take things for better or worse, or to add the true reading in the margin or at the bottom of the page, that we may no longer be accountable either for the nonsense or for the doggerel of other men. If you're going to use my hymns, use them as they are and quit changing them, because I don't want to be responsible for whatever you did to my song and have people think that it was me who did that, who wrote that. That's what he's saying. Love him. But one man did the church a great favor by polishing up one of Charles' best loved hymns. When Charles was 32, he wrote a Christmas hymn that began, "Hark how all the welkin rings, glory to the King of Kings, peace on earth and mercy mild, God and sinners reconciled. Joyful all ye nations rise, join the triumph of the skies. Universal nature say, Christ the Lord is born today." The word welkin was an old English term for the vault of heaven. It was Charles' friend, evangelist George Whitefield. Let me explain who George Whitefield is. So when, again, we have this holy club, and John is a priest in England, and they very much stuck to their buildings, but things were kind of on the downswing in the Church of England, and not a lot of people were going to church. And George Whitefield was a really great preacher. And he started going out, meeting people where they were and preaching outside, like in the fields. As people were coming and going to work, as people were working in the fields, he would stand out there and preach to them in the open air. And finally convinced John Wesley to do the same. And John Wesley described it as, "I submitted myself to become more vile to do this." But it was one of the ways that this Methodist movement really gained traction among people, because people didn't have to go to church in order to hear the good news. They're basically, these preachers eliminated that hurdle of getting people into the church. Instead, they heard the good news, and then that motivated them to get more involved in their faith. John Wesley and George Whitefield did end up parting ways over some theological differences, but he was a good influence on them, I think. George Whitefield, who, when he published this carol in his collection of hymns in 1753, changed the words to the now beloved, "Hark the herald angels sing." I have to say, I do think that Whitefield made the right choice there. I don't think it would have been nearly as long lasting had they kept the word welkin in there, because I certainly didn't know it. So that's kind of a fun story with about 80 asides from me. Let's stick on the theme of angels and do angels from the realms of glory. Angels from the realms of glory. And this, I'm going to warn you right now, I've got side stories already, I can tell. So this was written in 1816. It says, like all Moravians, John Montgomery had a burden for world evangelism. He was the only Moravian pastor in Scotland, but he and his wife felt God's call to be missionaries to the island of Barbados. All right, I gotta stop already. And I want to tell you a little bit about the connection of Moravians and Methodists, because it's probably not going to show up in the story of the hymn, but I still find it interesting. John Wesley, again, founder of the Methodist movement, when he was a young man, traveled to America to be a missionary in Savannah, Georgia. For all intents and purposes, that mission did not go well. It was not successful, and he headed back to England, kind of basically feeling pretty down about himself because it wasn't good. On the way back, there was a storm that the ship encountered, and everyone on the ship was afraid, right? You're out in the middle of the ocean, there's a massive storm. I'd say everyone, but there was a group of Moravian Christians. Now, Moravians are just another denomination, another group of Christians. These originated in Germany, but as you can tell, began spreading. There are Moravian churches around. Not a lot in this area, but they do exist. Um, And the Moravians were singing hymns on the ship, and it really impressed John Wesley. He was like, "How are you not afraid? Like, this is terrifying." But they really had this sense of peace that God was with them. And that is what inspired John Wesley when he got back to London, England, to attend a Moravian class meeting, our meeting on Aldergate Street. Now, if that sounds familiar to you, it was at that meeting that John Wesley had an experience of his heart being strangely warmed and feeling for the first time truly that God loved him, that God has forgiven him, and that assurance of faith, which changed his life. Um, and then that was thanks to the Moravians. So kind of a cool connection to Methodism. But not this guy in particular. All right, so John Montgomery and his wife felt the call to be missionaries to the island of Barbados, tearfully placing their 6-year-old son James in a Moravian settlement in Hill near Ballymena, County Antrim, Ireland. They sailed away. James never saw them again, for they perished in Barbados. So John and his wife feel the call to go to Barbados to be missionaries. They do not take their infant son. They leave him behind in Ireland, um, and he never sees them again. And it's this son. Left with nothing, James was enrolled in a school in England, and when he didn't do well, he was apprenticed by school authorities to a baker. Baking wasn't for James. He ran away and spent his teenage years drifting from pillar to post, writing poetry and trying his hand at one thing and then another. And he eventually settled down in Sheffield, England. Well, he's making his way around the UK at this point. In his early 20s, James began working for the local newspaper, the Sheffield Register, and there he found his niche. He loved writing. It was a politically active newspaper, and when its owner had to suddenly flee the country to avoid persecution and imprisonment, they do not have freedom of the press in the same way that we do. James purchased the paper and renamed it the Sheffield Iris. His editorials, too, proved unpopular with local officials. On 2 separate occasions, he was thrown into jail, but he emerged from prison a celebrity, and he used his newly acquired fame to promote his favorite issues. Chief among them was the gospel. Despite the loss of his parents, James Montgomery remained devoted to Christ and to the scriptures, and he championed the cause of foreign missions and of the British Bible Society. As the years passed, he became the most respected leader in Sheffield, and his writings were eagerly read by its citizens. Early on Christmas Eve, 1816, James, who was 45, opened his Bible to Luke chapter 2 and was deeply impressed by verse 13. Pondering the story of the heralding angels, he took his pen and started writing. By the end of the day, his new Christmas poem was being read in the pages of his newspaper. How convenient to be a poet and then have a place that you can publish your poetry. How convenient. So nice. It was later set to music and was first sung on Christmas Day, 1821, in a Moravian church in England. Angels from the realms of glory. His parents would have been proud. It's kind of a fun story. Again, I just find it fascinating how we can sing these songs and have no idea where they came from. I'm trying to remember what I did before so I don't do the same ones again. Um, but if you're ever interested in borrowing any of these books, if this is something that is of interest to you, the origins of hymns, I have done in the past some uh, sermon series around hymns because there is quite a bit of theology in the hymns that we sing, which is part of the reason I love hymns. I love contemporary music as well, and I think Sarah has done such a wonderful job of finding music that really speaks to how we are. I want to do one final one for you before I get off today. And we're going to do Away in the Manger, and I'm pulling this from Stories of hymns we love. So it says how congregational singing as we know it in our Sunday schools and churches today came about is a very interesting story. Until a little more than 400 years ago, common people did not sing at all in church. I feel like that's such an integral part of our worship is singing and communal singing. Um, it would be so bizarre to not have it. The music was produced only by priests or by specially selected choirs. Then, too, the whole service, songs and all, was in Latin, which most of the people did not understand. This is true. Um, Latin was the language of the Roman Empire, and the church was sanctioned by the Roman Empire and became the official religion of the Roman Empire by Emperor Constantine. And around that, Latin became kind of the official language of the church. And even as people quit speaking Latin, um, the church kept it. And the church kept it in various places. During the Reformations is when you really start to see Bibles, after the printing press was invented, getting published and translated into what we call the vernacular languages, which is the languages that people actually speak. So the first Bible in English was translated by John Wycliffe, and that would have been again like 1500s. Martin Luther did the first German Bible, again 1500s. So for many of and even then, the services were still in Latin, and in the Catholic Church, the services were still in Latin until Vatican II in the 1960s. So there are people alive today who remember church only being in Latin, which means unless you're fluent in Latin, you don't know what's happening or what's being said. And there was a time in church history where even the priests were not really literate, and they would memorize the mass phonetically. And so I just feel like it's not a good way to do things. If you can't, I went to a church service in Germany for Easter when I was in college, and part of it was in Latin and part of it was in German, and I could understand about the same amount in either language, and did not get hardly anything out of that service. I mean, you can look around and you can like see things, and it's also part of the reason that stained glass became such a popular thing, because many people learned the stories of the Bible by looking at the stained glass. Because they weren't literate, and because everything that was said in a language that they didn't speak. So it's fascinating. All right. So with the Protestant Reformation in Europe came a number of hymns in the everyday vernacular language of the people for use in their worship, but there was needed a gifted leader like Martin Luther, who I just mentioned, to give the great impulse and expression to congregational singing. Luther, who became the renowned leader of the Reformation, was a poor miner's son and was born in Eisleben, Germany, at the foot of the Harz Mountains in 1483. He was divinely talented in music and could play the flute and lute, in addition to being an excellent singer. As a boy, while a student at the Franciscan monastery school, Luther often used his beautiful voice to sing at the windows of wealthy citizens for alms to be given to the poor. At Christmas time, he and his companions often went wandering through the neighboring villages, singing the carols of the infant Jesus. To Luther, music was a gift and a grace of God. It could drive out the devil and make men forget all wrath. We are not surprised then that later in life, Luther became intensely interested in encouraging congregational singing. I wish to compose sacred hymns so that the word of God may dwell among the people, also by means of songs. The people should have hymns as well as the Bible in their own language so that they could read God's word and speak to him in their songs. How often do we do that today? The Protestant church services were no longer to be in Latin, but in the common language of the people. The first Protestant hymnal was published in Wittenberg, Germany in 1524. It contained only 8 hymns, 4 of them written by Luther himself. This little book flew all over Europe in answer to a deep felt want. The new hymns with the magnificent music to which they were set were eagerly learned by the people. We hear of musicians playing them on blowhorns from church steeples and of crowds singing them in the marketplaces. Luther's poetic gifts being once unfolded, he composed many more hymns, winning the name of the Nightingale of Wittenberg. Within 20 years after the first hymnal was issued, at least 117 collections of hymns by Luther and his associates have been printed. Isn't it interesting that some of the greatest leaders of churches also have proclivity to music? And I wonder if there is a connection between the success of their movements and their ability to communicate through music, that people latched onto it because people receive music in a different way. One of Luther's most famous hymns is "A Mighty Fortress is Our God," which was written in 1529. But Luther also loved to appeal to children. He chose happy tunes and fitted charming words to them. One of the best is entitled, "Give heed, my heart, lift up thine eyes." The little cradle song, "Away in a Manger," which has been the delight of children all over the world, is thought to have been written for his small son, Hans, for a Christmas Eve festival, perhaps in 1530. Doesn't it give a sweet picture of the baby Jesus in the manger? The last stanza is a prayer, which we will all like to learn and say together. And so the last stanza of the hymn, "Be with me, Lord Jesus, I ask thee to stay. Close by me forever, and love me, I pray. Bless all the dear children in thy tender care, and fit us for heaven to live with thee there." And there's a picture in the book of, this is Luther here and his family. And it says, "The charming picture painted in 1866 hangs in the Museum of Leipzig, Germany." So not made while he was alive. One more fun story. So many of you know I grew up in the Lutheran Church, but my favorite Martin Luther story actually has to do with his wife. Martin Luther was a monk, but left being a monk because he didn't believe that there should be a hierarchy of Christianity. People kind of saw monks and nuns as like better than everybody else, and he believed that everybody was equal before God. And so he didn't really believe anymore in having sort of these special vocations for people to be monks and nuns. And when he would put out these pamphlets, and there was a group of nuns that read it and decided they did not want to be nuns anymore, and they were following Luther's ideas, and so they escaped their convent because they weren't allowed to leave. Most of the nuns at this time would have been cloistered, meaning that they did not have contact with the outside world, but they escaped in a pickled herring delivery, like barrels, which is really funny. And so then Martin Luther had to find wives for all these nuns because in the 1500s, there's no real way for them to provide for themselves. And so he was basically being matchmaker, like a monk and a nun, here you go, have a good life. And there was one nun in particular, former nun, I guess, at this point, who was not happy with anybody that Luther tried to pair her off with. And finally, he's like, "Well, what do you want?" And she's like, "I'm going to marry you." And I think Luther needed a woman as formidable as Katharina von Bora, who he later affectionately called "My Katie." And they had a very happy marriage. And so I love that picture because that is exactly how I imagine them to be. And so I hope those were some fun stories, again, of some origins of the hymns that we sing around this time of year. I hope that this is a Merry Christmas for you, and I look forward to all the blessings that God has in store for us coming up in 2025. Until next time, God bless. Thank you for joining us for this episode of What's Going On, a video and audio podcast of First United Methodist Church in Yankton, South Dakota. We'd love to have you join us for worship on Sundays at 10 a.m., either in person or via our live stream, which can be found at our website, www.firstumcyankton.org, or by searching First UMC Yankton on YouTube.